Hello, my name is Danielle Jean-Guillaume Satal. I am the Youth Services Bureau Administrator for the town of Greenwich. I'm excited to serve as the moderator of tonight's community conversation and reflection on student identity and diversity in Greenwich. It's pretty amazing how this event came to be. It was imagined by two Greenwich High School graduates, Lucy Turkel and Noreen Kurji. These women are current University of Connecticut seniors who felt compelled to create an opportunity for Greenwich High School students to talk about issues that concern them and to consider collectively ways to address these issues. This event is sponsored by partners who have been very receptive to the concerns of young people in Greenwich. We thank Greenwich Library, Greenwich Alliance for Education, Greenwich High School, and YWCA Greenwich for their invaluable support. Tonight, we have 5 members of the Greenwich High School student body who have come together to share their personal experiences, concerns, and insights on identity, diversity, and inclusion, and what it looks like, and what this looks like in Greenwich. They are committed to starting this much needed conversation and to working with their peers and with the community. I will ask each of them to start tonight's conversation with a brief introduction and a reflection on the following questions. So, who are you? How do you wish to be perceived in the community? And why is this work towards understanding and addressing racial, social, and socioeconomic justice and diversity important to you? And I will start with Sydney.
Hi, my name is Sydney Steele. I'm a senior at Greenwich High School. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm Afro-Latina, but more importantly, I'm a big part of anti-bullying and inclusion efforts within my community and school. I think it's really important for us to have smaller discussions such as these, so we can each do our part in making sure our community values every race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and economic status as much as our community values cisgendered, straight, white people or men. Because we have a long way to go when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity in Greenwich, especially in the Greenwich school system.
Tiffany, please share.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Tiffany Zhang, and I'm a senior at Greenwich High School. I'm a second-generation Chinese American, but beyond my racial and cultural identity, I would also like to emphasize that I'm an artist, I'm a pianist, and probably most importantly, the leader of the Diversity Awareness Club at GHS. I believe that I, as well as many others in my community, who have a considerable amount of privilege, should especially be using our platform to advance racial, social, and socioeconomic justice and diversity. And it's necessary for us to recognize this privilege and act on it, because to not do so is being willfully ignorant and complicit in these social injustices. So again, I believe it's crucial that I and others in Greenwich use our platform to amplify the voices of those who face these social injustices.
Thank you. Pratik?
Hi, my name is Pratik Kurup. I'm a junior at GHS. I'm really excited to be here. My pronouns are he and him. I think it's super important that we can have this conversation tonight to encourage others to also continue this conversation and this larger discussion about diversity and inclusion, whether that's with friends or family or in the school.
Thank you. Divya?
Hello, my name is Divya Shenoy, and I am a sophomore at Greenwich High School. First of all, I'd just like to thank everyone who showed up tonight, and to Danielle, Lucy, and Noreen for organizing this panel. It is a wonderful opportunity to get to know each other's identities and discover more about yourself and how you wish to be perceived by others. So I'm an Indian American teenager who was born in Stamford, Connecticut, and I moved to Riverside in 2013. Both my parents came to America from India, but I know they certainly did not leave behind any of their cultural values, which I believe have shaped me into the unique person I am. This work towards diversity is extremely important to me as it helps bridge divides between racial and social barriers through constructive discussion. The goal of this panel is not only to make ourselves feel comfortable in our own shoes, but also offer insights to others as to why inclusivity within diversity is important and make them realize their unique positions in society.
Thank you, Divya. Olivia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Schnur. I am a senior at Greenwich High School. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the daughter of an Iranian American and a German American. This work is always important to promote equality, equity, and awareness in Greenwich. And I think especially given the past year with the Black Lives Matter movement and also the pandemic, it's more important than ever for us to play an active role and to begin these discussions more vehemently than we have in the past so that we can make change in our own community.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. I asked you guys to define who you are because we are often placed in boxes. Our culture seems to be committed to keeping us into these assigned categories, but we are multi-layered, and this notion of labels limits us. But with that, I want us to reflect on labels and terms that have become popular in the mainstream conversation of late. And the first is privilege, which refers to rights and that grants benefits to some and not to others. Microaggressions, which are subtle and offensive comments or actions that reinforce and perpetuate stereotypes. Excuse me. And the acronym, very new to many, is BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. This term moves beyond people of color, POC, and acknowledges that not all people of color face the same level of inequities. So the term BIPOC recognizes Black and indigenous people as severely impacted by systemic racial injustices. So of course there are more terms and they're ever evolving, but I wanna ask you, what terms do you know? Are you familiar with these terms? Is there value to these labels? And I will start with Prathik.
Well, first of all, I think it's important for us to define these terms like BIPOC when we're having conversations like this, and diversity as well. I think they can mean very different things for different people, and that's really important that we can share that and we can explore those terms so that we can better understand each other and where each of us are coming from. And I don't think we should necessarily get rid of labels or that they're automatically a bad thing, because many people do take pride in them. But I think it's important, as I said, to address the negative effects that these labels can have on individuals and go over all terms so that people feel included and understood in these discussions. In regards to microaggressions, I think I've been personally lucky and only faced minor microaggressions, but as everybody can attest to, they can definitely build up, and it's that impact that can really fester over time.
Thank you. Tiffany?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with what Prophet was saying about both the benefits and the harm of using these labels. And I wanted to touch upon the label BIPOC specifically. So I think a lot of the times people tend to homogenize or equate the experiences of individuals and communities of different ethnic backgrounds, which just completely ignores the diverse history and unique problems some communities face that others don't. So BIPOC, this term kind of increased around the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. There was like a shift from the term POC, people of color, which was often broadly used. Yeah, so the term BIPOC recognizes these Black and Indigenous struggles specifically, and it was very necessary to use these terms instead of POC in order to better amplify the voices and experiences of Black and Indigenous struggles, and to also address the kind of invisibility these communities have faced so far. And then as for microaggressions, they really do reveal people's implicit biases, and they're also something I've experienced firsthand. So one of my most prominent memories was in elementary school in 5th grade, when I was told by a school staffer that I, in particular, should be more obedient and quiet than my peers because people from my country, China, are so polite and obedient. And there were clearly a lot of things wrong with that, but this is just the reality for a lot of Asian Americans, as well as so many other individuals of different races and identities. And while microaggressions may not be so overtly offensive or racist, and are sometimes inadvertent, they're still offensive in nature and suggest that people are holding on to these beliefs like unconsciously, and they still continue to perpetuate this racist or like sexist or whatever culture. So I think the conversation around this term is really productive and very necessary because it addresses a different, often ignored type of prejudice and intolerance.
Thank you. Olivia?
Sure. So I guess I'll just go off of Tiffany's point about microaggressions. I think especially in Greenwich, you see more microaggressions than you would specifically aggressions because I think people don't always intend to, put them on others. However, I've experienced very few microaggressions in my life, but having the Middle Eastern background that my mother's family provides, I had one experience when I was in 8th grade where a boy made a comment about how I was bombing it like my people. And he meant it as a joke when I had missed a volleyball shot in my gym class. But I think the reason that when he meant it as a joke, that's what made it so offensive, was that he didn't see it as something that was so offensive and cruel towards an entire culture. He just thought it was something playing along with somebody who he was friendly with. And so again, I think just having that one experience and knowing that there are people who are Black, Indigenous, people of color who are consistently experiencing these every day or, on such a normal basis, it's not a normal thing, and it can really stick with you, especially, remembering it 4 years later. I think to go to labels, I agree with everybody who's spoken so far. I think labels can be good or bad. I think it also has to do with personal opinion. I think some people see their labels as a unifying thing, something that provides them with a community, but I think others also see them as, like you said, Danielle, a box that they don't want to necessarily be put in. I think some of these identifiers really have created communities, for example, LGBTQIA+, for whether it's gender identity or sexual orientation. I think a lot of people would see those as positive identifiers. I think with BIPOC specifically, having become more prevalent usage in the past year or so, it is really a unifying term for oppressed groups in this country. And while it does definitely allow for collaboration between different cultures and people with different backgrounds, I think it is inherently disappointing that this term had to be coined to communicate the racism that is so apparent still in this country in 2020.
Thanks. Sydney. Thanks, Olivia.
I completely agree with everything Olivia is saying. I think it is extremely disappointing that we had to coin a term in 2020 to include all oppressed races and religions and people of color, which is really disappointing and speaks a lot to our society. And on the note of microaggressions, I've personally been through a lot of microaggressions growing up in a predominantly white community as a biracial child. In the summer, I get significantly darker because I tan. But during the winter, people often ask me if I bleached my skin to fit in. I've heard that multiple times since I was a child, and it's just stuff like that that builds up. And it's just, I feel like in a community like Greenwich, kids are less likely to be overtly racist, and they're more just sly, subtle remarks that just, you kind of look past for a little, and then you start thinking about it, and it's really disappointing that this is still happening. But I do think that labels are very necessary in order for us to recognize the struggles and privileges that certain races, certain genders, sexual orientations have versus others, or economic status even.
Thank you. Divya?
It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. These very words were spoken by Audre Lorde, a Black American civil rights activist. I only became familiar with the term BIPOC a few weeks ago. Knowing what it means now, I am aware of its inclusive purpose to build solidarity among Black, Indigenous, and colored people in order to advance racial justice. In terms of microaggressions, I have not experienced any myself, but the question we must ask ourselves is what makes microaggressions different from other rude or insensitive actions or comments? So, in my personal opinion, I believe that microaggressions are more than just insults, insensitive comments, or generalized jerky behavior. In fact, there's something very specific, the kinds of remarks, questions, or actions that are painful because they have something to do with the person's membership in a group that's discriminated against or subject to stereotypes. And a key part of what makes them so disconcerting is that they happen casually, frequently, and often without any harm intended in everyday life. So now to address labels and identity mishaps, there are certain instances where we may be unsure of which term is appropriate to use to refer to someone or someone of a certain race, religion, sexual orientation, or any identity. This happens to a multitude of people and it is nothing to be ashamed of or worried about. What we can do to solve this, however, is to educate ourselves on commonly used terms of identity and gain insight from others with experience. Our ultimate goal is to create a safe space where people can openly discuss their perspectives because the only true happiness in life is knowing who you are.
Thank you, Divya. Thank you all. So in keeping with this comment or our comments on the impact of labeling or the values of labeling, I have recently learned through discussions with you about labels that are assigned to kids based on their elementary or middle school. I didn't know about this. And I was surprised about a lot that I've learned. And so I would like you to share what you know about this comment. So I learned that there are many assumptions that deeply impact educational access and social experiences. So I would like you to share your reflection on that comment, but also how did your transition from middle to high school go? How did your middle school experience impact your educational opportunities, your opportunities for extracurricular engagement, the expectations placed on you, your expectations? What did you think about other kids who came from different schools? And how has that informed your high school experience? So, Olivia.
Yeah, so this is something that I'm very passionate about. I grew up in Cos Cob. I still live in Cos Cob. I was in the same house my whole life. I went to Central Middle School, which is considered sort of the middle ground of the town economically. And I also think in terms of diversity, it probably has the middle proportion of minorities compared to Western and Eastern. Eastern probably represents the least amount of minorities in their middle school and Western the most. However, I've noticed in my 4 years at Greenwich High School that Western has the smallest proportion of students in AP and honors classes, which I think is really a reflection of the fact that, in my opinion, resources are not equal to students that come from the Western elementary schools. And I think that this really starts very young to the point where when they get to high school and perhaps the school and the administration is trying to offer them more resources, the students that come from Western, it's almost too late to kind of get them engaged or to get that representation that we would like to see. Greenwich High School really prides itself on the fact that it is the one high school for Greenwich, and it is a culmination of all of the elementary schools into one. And so we do have a lot of diversity, but I think there is almost a separation of minorities because a lot of minorities come from Western and the Western parts of Greenwich, and then you don't necessarily see that reflected in the classes. So again, coming from Central Middle School, it's just sort of, it's stereotypes that exist that you hear about from your classmates when you get to high school. The fact that your middle school is an identifier in high school, and as a senior, we still almost use them as identifiers is again really disappointing to me. It really follows you, and I don't think that, as I said, the diversity at GHS is accomplished the way the administration would like. I think that there's things like the cafeteria where there's something known as Little Mexico, and the fact that that term was coined by students and that I've heard throughout my 4 years at GHS for an area where a lot of Latino and Hispanic students sit, that really is again disappointing. And I think that the students sort of contribute to this racism and not necessarily mistreatment of their classmates, but in a way it is by having these labels and by having these divisions. And it's a combination of students and administration that need to make the change so that these identifiers are not such a negative thing.
Thank you. Sydney?
I completely agree. Regarding middle school, I went to Western Middle School, um, which just completely follows you all the way through high school. I was recently talking to one of my friends from Eastern, one of my closest friends, and I asked her if she had known about the D Wing, which is actually it's a part of the school almost tucked away in the basement that provides resource rooms and extra attention for students who find it difficult to maybe do work on their own or concentrate in class. It is also where a lot of the social workers are. And throughout my 8th grade year at Western, we had multiple assemblies about choosing high school classes. But during each assembly and during the very first meeting when we met our guidance counselors, they made it very clear to us that we had the D Wing as an option. My friend from Eastern had no idea what the D Wing was going into high school. She knew about all the AP classes she could take, but we didn't really know about any AP classes that we were going to be offered sophomore year and up. She knew that we couldn't take any AP classes freshman year. I had no idea that we couldn't take AP. Well, I could assume that we couldn't take AP classes freshman year, but they didn't explicitly tell us that. They pushed social work on us and they pushed extra help, special attention, learning centers on us. And it also almost became a self-fulfilling prophecy for many students because they started to feel many students from Western because they started to feel as though they needed that special attention because it was being pushed on them. That's all they knew going into high school. Also, regarding Little Mexico in the back of the Student Center, I know that many of my friends from Eastern, they try to avoid that area, and it's mainly Western kids. The school, every grade is so polarized between Western, Eastern, and Central kids. It is just, and it to the public eye, it seems as though we're very diverse, everybody interacts with everyone, but it is very clear where you sit, what you do, what you look like, what middle school you went to, and that is how you're perceived. And that follows you all through high school.
Wow, thank you. Divya?
Yes. So I went to Eastern Middle School in Riverside, and during my 3 years, I have to say the majority of my grade consisted of Caucasian students. I was probably one of the 6 or 7 Indian American kids. So I didn't dwell on this realization until I entered high school, which was probably one of the most impactful transitions I've experienced in my life so far. It was almost as if I was hit on the head with the word diversity. The start of this seemingly new life opened up such a wide network of friends and peers whom I could just be myself around and comfortably converse with. In terms of extracurricular opportunities, the healthy range of clubs at Eastern Middle School, and of course, having an older sibling, prepared me well for the multitude of programs at the high school. Now, while I have not experienced any conflict in the extracurricular department, academics is a bit of a different story. I didn't really pay attention to this too much during my middle school career, but I feel as if there were some sort of predetermined IQ labeled onto some students of certain races and ethnicities. And as an Asian myself, I felt as if some students automatically assumed I was quote unquote smart and tended to gravitate to me for help on many assignments. And while I initially felt honored and respected, I also learned that I was falling into this some sort of trap where I was almost being taken advantage of simply because of my ethnicity. Now, people obviously shouldn't assume that some people are smarter just because they're of a certain race, ethnicity, or nationality. And while, as I said before, I felt honored to have been very helpful on some assignments, I felt as if comments were also floating around in terms of Latino kids or Black students that they were not as resourceful or not as intelligent simply because they went to a middle school like Western Middle School. And as Olivia was saying, obviously there was a higher number of students in AP classes from Eastern. And I feel as if this is kind of the resources we are equipped with going into high school. It is not the fault of the students. It's not their intelligence level. It is the circumstances we are raised in, the resources we are initially given that set us up for our high school career.
Yeah, I don't want to cut before Pratap, but I just wanted to add one thing in response to what Divya said. But I really think that in Greenwich, success is measured so unfairly for students. You have to be in clubs, you have to be a volunteer, you have to maybe participate in a sport. And I think while a lot of us have those opportunities, many students don't, especially from low-income areas of town where they're expected to have a job after school, take care of their siblings. And so I think that really has an impact on how students perceive themselves at our school and how stereotypes are almost made, because a lot of the students who come from higher income families are able to do whatever they want because they have these resources for private tutors or the time just for sports and activities. And I think that creates a really unhealthy cycle where you can't feel successful in this town if you are from a low income household where you have real responsibilities.
Wow.
Yeah, just adding on to what Olivia was saying, like that idea of a cycle that you're constantly in, that you can't get out of. It's really sad. And like everybody was saying, they really travel. The label of your middle school travels with you throughout your education in Greenwich, and that's really unfair. But that's your definition. I mean, that's how you're identified as. And you know, you'll hear kids saying like, "Oh, he's an Eastern kid," or "He's a Western kid," like not by their name or not by who they are, but really just by what middle school they go to, and the prejudged ideas and stereotypes that go along with each school really carry a lot of weight throughout your high school, whether that's through academics or like everybody was saying, extracurriculars. And one thing, you know, I've noticed is in AP classes, you'll see that 99%, or I shouldn't say that, but the majority of kids will be from Eastern and Central. And I have barely any AP or honors level classes that are with predominantly Western students. And so the balance is clearly not there. And just personally for me, like I went to Eastern and in Riverside before that. And when I was at Riverside, I didn't really notice it then, but it was only later when my parents really pointed it out to me that I might have just been the darkest kid in the school or in my grade. And that says a lot because there were definitely very few kids who were not Caucasian. And just naturally because of that, my friend group to this day is predominantly white. And I think it's the boundaries and kind of the preset notions that are set with that, like I was saying, carry a lot of weight throughout your high school, and especially with your friends. For me, I'm an Indian American, but I never really, partly because of the elementary school I went to and just the friends, I never had really just Indian American friends. I was actually mainly just friends with most white kids. So I think that's interesting to see that it works on both sides, that you're friends with the people that you kind of grew up with or the people that you identify with.
Thank you. Tiffany, anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with what everybody has been saying so far. And I think I can speak more on the academic and social aspect of my transition from middle school to high school. And for some context, I went to Central Middle School. So like Olivia stated, as I started taking, again, more AP and honors classes, I would realize that most of the students were disproportionately Eastern students. And I would see maybe like a max of 3 Western students in a class of 24. And this kind of disproportionate representation not only affected the academic setting, but also my friend group or like the social setting for a lot of others as well. Personally, I kind of stuck with my middle school friend group, but when I would reach out and become friends with other students, they would again be mostly Eastern and also Caucasian students. And I think a result of this was that most of them were in my classes. I think just like when you're in a classroom, you're more likely to interact and become friends with the students in your class. But I think this kind of isolation and separation of Western, Middle, and Eastern school students in the academic setting contributed to a sense of discomfort and unwillingness to diversify friend groups outside of the classroom as well. And I also think that in the transition to high school, we weren't really provided an opportunity to reach out and interact with one another. Or if there were some efforts, they weren't particularly effective. So I think this kind of maybe inadvertently contributed to a sense of division between the middle schools.
Thank you for sharing. I'm wondering what your educators and school administrators think of this. I wonder if there's some surprise there. And I'm kind of cheating a little bit because I saw a question pop up because a few of you guys are on the Youth Commission, and there are a lot of Youth Commission projects that are focused on outreach. And this one question that if I were patient, I could have waited later. But the question is, would more interaction among the 3 middle schools before high school have helped? Do we need to start in elementary school, which Olivia, you once upon a time mentioned, and what kind of all-town activities would help? And so I like this question because I'm hoping that Youth Commission folks are on this, participating in this conversation, and they can start brainstorming ideas. I know, Prathit, I don't mean to expose you. I know that you're brainstorming an idea where you can connect all the middle schools, if you don't mind just sharing a little bit, because it's not diversity focused, but it's a natural way to connect people. If you don't mind sharing just for a second.
Yeah, definitely. So I am on the First Selectmen's Youth Commission with Olivia and Divya. And one of the projects I'm working on is to start a middle school science fair that'll be for not just the 3 public schools, but also all the private schools to come together. And like Danielle, you were saying, it's not just about diversity necessarily, but it's about connecting people so that in the future, more interaction will occur naturally between Central, Western, and Eastern, and really all the middle schools in town. And just like adding on to that, I think it's, to answer the question, it's really important that we do have those interactions from an early age, whether that is elementary or whether that is during middle school.
Thank you, Prathit. I'm hopeful that now that you've said this publicly, that we can really put this into action. And I'm going to change our conversation a little bit because I'm reflecting on the motivation for this conversation. So I chatted with Lucy and Noreen, and I asked them what motivated them to have this, to create this moment for us to engage. And I'm peeking at my notes to make sure I capture all of it. And they shared that, while the world was sort of on pause, due to the global pandemic and these seemingly unnatural events, and our lives were disrupted, and with the economic and social disparities that were exposed by COVID-19, this mandated social isolation, the 24/7 news cycle, where we got to witness racial violence and trauma on repeat, debates about abuse of power, reflections on our responsibility as people of privilege, political discord, and this international call to address systemic racism against Black people. So they shared that this was all way too much to process. And so they felt that the community needed to come together to reflect on this moment and to kind of process it together so that there can be a collaborative effort towards understanding and healing and work. And so I'm asking you a very loaded question, but I want to ask, how has the events of the last 9 months impacted your life? Pretty broad. I will start with Olivia.
This is a really loaded question. I think that I grew up in a family that was incredibly political. We always have CNN on in the background, and to have a voice at the dinner table, at family events, whatever it is, I always had to be educated, and my family really prioritized being politically active and engaged, and to recognize my own privilege. So even though I do know that I live in a lot of privilege, I've been constantly reminded of it by my parents for as long as been in high school since I've been growing up, also with an older brother who was very politically involved. I also have been involved in a number of clubs throughout high school. Specifically, the Youth Commission, I think, has been something that has really impacted my view on diversity, especially this summer. So going into my role as co-chair for this year, I was really excited because through the application process, my initial thought was just, okay, now I can finally make some change here. I can bring on some new students who, represent the diversity in Greenwich. So I don't have to keep looking at this room full of just, not very diverse faces, a lot of white kids who are advocating for groups who are not here. And so that was really a huge goal of mine in June and July. However, when I went through the application process, I noticed that we just didn't have the applicants that I wanted to bring in. Just in terms of diversity, we didn't have them. And I think that really reflected how early these differences in this town kind of occur, and how it was almost too late for me to be looking for people just in high school for these spots on my youth commission to bring them on, and how we kind of have to be starting to look at change at a younger age. And I also think within the Black Lives Matter movement, it's become very apparent to me in the last few months that it's no longer okay to just not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. And so I've tried to separate myself from this role of performative activist, somebody who just reposts on my Instagram or who just says something in class, but also finding new ways, especially like this panel, to voice my opinions on a larger platform, so that not only can conversations be started, but so that I can make it clear what my opinions are, and kind of figure it out for myself how I can start contributing in a better way.
Thank you. Sydney?
I've been thinking the exact same thing. With everything happening with quarantine and having to watch all of police brutality just right in front of your face, you couldn't look away because you had nothing else to do. There was nothing to distract yourself with. And I think I am still growing up very, very privileged, and I surrounded myself with mainly Caucasian people, and I kind of just rolled with the fact that they didn't have to worry about any of this. So I thought to myself that I didn't have to worry about any of this. But now I think that I'm doing as much as I can to make up for the time that I sat and basically just ignorance was bliss, just making up for the amount of time that I just ignored everything going on in the world because I lived in a bubble. But I think that if we use social media, the only way to engage young people, we're always on social media. If you have time to post a picture of the restaurant you're at, you could post a petition, or you could post a donation link. I think that's very much the best way to engage and motivate young people to see that there is more to the world than just whatever is right in front of you.
Thank you. Tiffany?
Yeah, so I've had very similar experiences to Sydney and Olivia. And during quarantine and the Black Lives Matter movement, I did a lot of self-reflection and internalized a lot of new information and experiences that I never heard of or never tried to understand beforehand. And this wasn't really a choice for me anymore. It was a moral obligation, seeing all the injustices and the murder of George Floyd. And another thing that came up in a lot of my conversations was the kind of relationship the Asian American community had specifically with the Black community, not to make it about the Asian American experience. But like we were speaking about before with the term BIPOC and its intentions to kind of specifically highlight the struggles Black Americans face, I realized I became more aware of my own privilege as a light-skinned East Asian American. I realized I can never directly relate to the struggles Black Americans face. For example, I didn't have to worry about the consequences of my appearance. So in this process, I realized that it wasn't just a Black versus white issue. And within my community, there is admittedly a lot of anti-Blackness and also the unwillingness to care about anybody else. So to address this, I strive to educate myself further and my family and also my friends by having these very important long-term conversations over the months. And again, this took a lot of learning and also unlearning, which was somewhat of an uncomfortable process. But I think that when we are willing to be comfortable with or experience this discomfort, we're ultimately contributing to progress and fostering greater empathy.
Well said. Thank you. Divya?
It's quite challenging to sum up all the emotions of spirals and spirals of emotions and experiences we felt during the pandemic and experiencing the Black Lives Matter movement. I'd have to say this is one of the most influential movements I've observed in modern society. And while news of it has erupted alongside the ongoing pandemic within the news, there are many who have not even heard of it or only came to know after the tragic news of George Floyd's death. And to give those people the benefit of the doubt, of course, a fraction of this lack of knowledge is attributed to inadequate access to news sources or other outside information, but some of it is due to pure ignorance. And I believe especially in a town like Greenwich, which is considered fairly wealthy in comparison to others in Connecticut, we live in this sort of personal bubble where we are happy, where we have all these privileges. And even during the pandemic, we haven't felt much of a change except maybe with our school life or our work life. But other than that, our parents may not have experienced unemployment, or we may have not gone through some of the tragic experiences with a dearth of food and lack of access to adequate healthcare as some others have. And I feel like it is absolutely imperative for us to be knowledgeable of all the other experiences that people who may come from low-income families or others who are not doing so well during the pandemic. And I feel like it is our duty to inform ourselves on these matters and advocate for others who are experiencing them. If we just ignore it and simply say that, oh, it doesn't pertain to me because I am not African American, or I am not a person of color, so I should not be involved in this situation, that is completely the opposite attitude of what we should truly have. What we should truly strive for is to attain a sense of liberation with others, where we can all celebrate our diversity and differences and advocate for the right movements, all the right reasons to unite as one community.
Thank you. Prathit?
Well, I think for me personally, the Black Lives Matter movement, and after the murder of George Floyd, it was really a moment of reflection, I think, for all of us, and especially living in Greenwich. You realize the position you're in, and bubble really sticks with me, because I think it's true. We do live in a bubble, and we often don't realize it, or we don't often realize how much it affects us, but it does. And no matter how you face it, it's the fact that you don't really realize what kind of privilege that you have until you really see the other side for your own self. And I think that's what the movement and the pandemic really revealed to everybody about what we can do, and finding your place in the movement, and figuring out for yourself how this really affects you, because it affects everybody, and finding that super important. And so during May and June, talking to friends and talking to family about what we can do, and also encouraging discussion like this, to encourage others to continue fighting for the movement, and to make sure that everybody, like Divya was saying, is educated on these topics, because sadly people aren't, and that can make all the difference.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. What I appreciate is that your responses were, led with your emotions, and that there's a sense of urgency that, you're called to act, and, we're going to hold you accountable because you're being recorded. But also that, you have a community of adults in your lives who are going to support this work. And so I want you to reflect on who those people are, and in this moment, who can you partner with in the schools, in the community? I mean, I'm definitely here for you, but who else can you engage with to help you with this work? We are living in this, COVID-19 context, and so this work looks a little different. I like the whole social media element. That's how you guys speak. Sorry to put you in a box, but I know that works for you. But I want to know, how will you engage the adults in your life, your mentors, your advocates, in this work? Olivia?
I think the easiest answer to that question is probably just to look to your peers as well. Aside from adults, and I'll just start with our own generation. My classmates are some of the most inspiring people I've met, especially in my grade. My friends, I'm constantly getting emails from either the school or people I know, or on Instagram, seeing things that people are posting. There's just a consistent involvement of people our age, and it's so amazing to see, because I know that, as we get older, we are going to become the voices of and kind of replacing our mentors even now. So I definitely am very hopeful and optimistic with that. As for adults, I would say that it's a really sensitive subject to kind of ask people to give more, especially right now, as you see teachers who are just putting in so much work to try to even make their learning environment, able to function. I actually have a couple of teachers, I think, who are here today to watch, which I really appreciate. Thank you, guys. But we see them when they're in class trying to put something on the board or trying to load something on the Google Meet. As somebody who's full online, it's really challenging, and we recognize that. But I think that as we're in this time where we have to also really start looking at and prioritizing diversity, we have to look to adults to help us, whether that's teachers or administration, because it has to be a priority in schools, because that's where all of us are one community. We're all involved in things outside of school, but school is where we all collect and where we can all make probably the biggest change or the most direct change. So I think involving your mentors is, having them work on projects with you, give their advice. It's not just about administration coming up with their own projects, but also as students continue to engage, it's getting those older opinions, those more experienced opinions, because a lot of adults have gone through similar experiences, whether it may be different, because the Black Lives Matter movement is obviously unique in this year. Everything is always different with modern times, but I think that the adults in our lives all have really big impacts on us, and they're wonderful resources. So
Thank you, Olivia. I appreciate that you shouted out the teachers. I'm going to go to Tiffany, but I'm cheating and looking at a question. One educator shares that, I guess this person will volunteer to collaborate, and shares that teachers can do more to incorporate, anti-racist practices in their teaching, and ensure that curriculum reflects the students they're teaching and the culture that we're living in. So they have committed to, or I have someone who is committed to transforming their practice. So Tiffany, sorry to interrupt you. What would you like to share?
That's okay. So going off of what Olivia said about fostering more discussion within school, within like friend groups at home, I think it would be amazing to have these same discussions with the school administration, like directly. I think that while the administration made some attempted to acknowledge what we as students and the nation are going through, I don't think it particularly resonated with us, or at least it wasn't as prioritized as we wanted it to be. And we really do need more communication with school leadership, because I know that along with so many others, we don't know who to turn to or to bring attention to the problems like we're talking about right now. So I think it would be amazing to have maybe like a student body that is, again, passionate about social justice, to maybe regularly meet with administration and maybe even form like a board, just to ensure that we have student voices being heard and that our needs are being fully acknowledged. And I think that's also very doable within like COVID limitations, because we do have a lot of access to technological resources like Google Meets. And even though what we're saying right now might seem critical or overly critical to some people, we really do understand and sympathize with school administrators and teachers, with them having to deal with COVID and education and so many other issues, personal issues due to Corona, and like Olivia said as well. And we completely get it. We're in unprecedented times where so many things are happening, but we still would really like to have more emphasis on these issues like COVID, because with Black Lives Matter, it's still a historically monumental event, and it's disrupted so many students' lives, and it bears so much weight still. So it would be great to have more conversation and focus on diversity, inclusivity, and these topics.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tiffany. I cheated again and saw another chat. And there is an educator who vowed to be an ally in this work. And this person also suggested that you call out teachers who are not engaged. And I will qualify that by saying gently engage your educators and the leaders in your school in this conversation so they can hear you. Because, it's a different world for us older folks, and we process this a little different. There's a sense of urgency that you guys bring that we're not feeling. But, we meet in the middle. And so I have this person's name and I will share it with you later. So Tiffany, what would you like to share? I said Tiffany, Sydney. Sorry, Sydney.
Oh, good. I would like to just bring up how COVID happened around the same time as the Black Lives Matter movement really taking off for younger people and finding out about it. And I really think that the school missed an opportunity by not reaching out to students, especially students of color, students of different religions, students of low-income homes. They did a good job with offering lunches, but when it came to Black Lives Matter after George Floyd's murder, they didn't bring it up. And I think that the school often does just enough to say that they care about diversity, but they completely missed the opportunity to reach out to students and say, hey, if you need to talk about everything going on, like we have somebody here that this is when you push social work, not when you're in 8th grade going into high school. But yeah, I definitely think that I see teachers trying their best and trying to be as politically correct and as inclusive as they possibly can, but they can only do so much without proper help from the administration.
Thank you. Prethit?
Yeah, like Sydney was saying, it was definitely an unprecedented time for everybody. But I think to use those words, it was a missed opportunity, and in many ways, the administration could have taken the step to say encourage mental health professionals to reach out to us. And while I know for a fact that it was definitely a super difficult time, and a new civil rights movement was coming, and I think that for many students, it was even more difficult to see their place and to have an outlet to talk about other than friends or family. And especially in the conditions of the pandemic, it kind of really highlighted the fact that we need these people. And so going back earlier to the fact that we do need adults for sure. And the administration is exactly who we need to pair with and work together with to make sure that everybody feels included and everybody's voice is heard in the long run. And it's a lot about not just having physical support, but also having the right emotional support for us when we need it.
Thank you. Divya?
Right, so I know I thanked all the attendees in the beginning, but I just wanted to thank all the educators as well as parents who showed up tonight. I know it's an extremely tough job, even having a child adapting to the new high school lifestyle with the pandemic, and for all the educators who are leading programs, who are putting in so much effort to teach students daily. I know logging onto the Google Meets every day, working with technology, working around all those technological problems, it's definitely not an easy task. And I know we students like to complain about it, but it's also a burden on the teachers as well. And now just moving on to the subject of how we can involve educators in our community, I feel like we are raised in a society where we are taught to be independent, and that's the only way we can become successful. If we try our best by ourselves, if we work hard, if we ace every single test, if we only think about the fruits of our actions, really, not really the journey along the way. If we get into a good college, if we get a good job, etc., etc., that's the only determinant of success. It's not really. We have all these amazing educators surrounding us, and if we are raised in an independent community where we don't have anyone to look for help, when we are caught in that ditch, when we are trapped in that abyss with no way out, we falter because there's really no one we can turn to, no one who can help us. And that's when we truly fail. That is a true markiness of failure, not a grade, not a school report, not anything else. And to turn to these educators, they're like the lights in our lives, and I know they try hard every day to make our learning experience as amusing as possible. And with this unification in our community, with this collective diversity, I know we can make a combined effort to include everyone and have one unified effort towards liberation.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to read out something that we were seeing in the chat. Just as a social worker at GHS at Cantor House, who leads the Greenwich Junior United Way, we really appreciate hearing that, there are so many resources at Greenwich High School. I think every panelist has touched on this so far. I think, like Divya said, a lot of people at the high school don't want to go for help because we are so independent. And even if we know that some of these resources exist, it's sort of hard to reach out. And I also think in some ways, even though we have all of these resources, a lot of students don't know that they exist. So I think that's just something you have to work towards, is on both ends, is students learning how to reach out to our administrators and our resources, and also those resources being able to like reach out to the student body in a more effective way so that students are getting the help they need.
Right. Well, what you didn't share with this person's comment was that you all are incredible, and this person's very proud of you guys because you're having these tough conversations, and your community is proud of you, and we're starting something big here. So I'm really excited about this. So I really am grateful that you guys have been so candid. People are seconding it, but I also want to share that there is a question. Someone wonders, because now I can transition to the questions. Do you think that there's adequate representation, diversity in the academic staff, the teaching staff at your school?
I was going to bring this up because I've only ever had full year semester class teachers that are Caucasian or Asian. I've never had a female Black teacher, only a female Black sub. I've only ever had a male Black substitute teacher. And I think that for many students, just seeing, I know personally, if I had seen at a young age, especially in a predominantly white community, if I had seen at a young age a female, a Black female, an Indigenous female, any BIPOC female in a position of power as a teacher, I think that would have made all the difference for any student. And that may have just been a little bit of a little insecurity, secure kind of thing. But I don't think that there is any diversity amongst representation. But I think that we can definitely work on that. Like, we can work with the administration on that if that's something that they're concerned about too, that they have noticed as well. But I feel like nobody really talks about that at this school.
I don't think I had actually ever thought about that either until you asked. And just reading this comment from somebody in the chat about how we have no Black women teaching at GHS, and the only Latina teachers are in the world language department. I personally have I take Spanish as my world language, and I've learned so much from my teacher about her experiences growing up as a minority in a low-income family, and that has really changed the learning environment for like my Spanish class and my education overall for this year. And I think that if you had that representation in other classes, it would just bring so much more, so many more backgrounds and cultures, and that really would contribute to a more like well-rounded student body who understands minority and minority experiences better than we do now as a community.
Right, if people aren't there, you assume that they don't matter. So representation matters. So I appreciate you bringing that up. There was a comment I saw that it's long gone now, but about ableism. So in this conversation about diversity, we're going to have to start including people who we judge based on ability. And so we're going to have to expand this definition of diversity. It's when I was a kid, it was just black and white, and now it's this broad term now. So we're going to have to explore like the depths of diversity. Let me see if there's any question. I'm looking. As I dig through the questions, guys, do you have anything you want to share? They're coming fast, guys. I did see earlier a question. Would you guys be willing to engage the Board of Education in these conversations? You know, we're going to make friends in high places. So we're going to have these tough conversations with other people. So it is 8:01. So any parting comments? Is there something we didn't share?
I mean, just in regard to the Board of Ed, I think, yeah, that's exactly what we were saying, that we definitely need to join with the Board of Ed to make sure that that student teacher and student administrator connection exists. And so we can move forward with that in mind.
Thank you. There are other questions coming through that, and we're not going to give them the respect they deserve. So I think as a group, we're going to respond to them offline, okay? But they're really deep questions that we're going to really give them their due respect. So I am going to close. I hate to close, but I do want to thank you by name, Olivia, Tiffany, got that right now, Sydney, Prethit, and Divya. Thank you so very much for being so candid, for sharing of yourselves. Like, this thing is blowing up and people are so grateful for you. So thank you for being honest with your feelings and your experiences. I'm hopeful that this is the beginning of great things. I want to thank our partners who made this happen. And I also want to say that I hope that your peers see themselves in you and that they will be inspired to participate next time. And those kids who did not see themselves today, they're going to join us and make sure that their voices are heard in these conversations. So I do want to let the community know that the First Selectmen's Youth Commission will host the second Student Diversity Leadership Conference on February 6th. It's a half-day program that will continue these conversations and deepen them. And we will share more in the coming days. We're going to start engaging with diversity folks in all the schools, but this will be a high school program. It is co-sponsored by the First Selectmen's Diversity Advisory Committee and YWCA Greenwich. And I just want to thank again everyone for coming. We had over 100 people here tonight, guys. So people really appreciate that the youth voice matters. We're hopeful that after the diversity conference, we will continue this, and hopefully we will respond to your to the audience's questions in the coming days. I just want to read one more comment. Thank you so much. You all rock. I will keep listening. So you've made your community proud, and I just want to thank you again for everything and for joining me tonight. So I wish everybody happy rest of the month, happy holidays, and happy New Year 2021. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was great.
Thank you.
It's awesome. I'm really proud of you guys. Thank you so much.